Hi, I'm Jennifer Carter, and thank you for joining me on a podcast for parents, teachers, and administrators. Today's conversation should be a good one, and I'm sure it's something on your mind. So let's get to it. Thanks, you guys, for joining me on the podcast, and thanks for inspiring what I think will be a lively conversation about distance learning. If you guys could just introduce yourselves.
I'm Nana Lolachi. I've worked in different capacities in schools. I've been a teacher of different grades, and currently I'm working as a coordinator. So really working with targeted student populations, students who are English learners, and really seeing the administrative side of working in a school too for the first time. And I'm a mom of 2 boys.
And my name is Mahdis, and I am a mom of a little boy as well as a first grader. And he is in school here in Los Angeles. And I'm working from home, running 2 companies called the Make Agency and Polite Society, and trying to juggle homeschooling, parenting, momming, wifing, living. Notice my self-care comes last in that list, as I'm sure you women can relate to.
Absolutely. So, actually, Mahdis put up a Facebook post that caught my attention. So can you just share a little bit about what you said in that post, and, we can go from there.
Well, I shared a post talking a little bit about what's being asked of teachers. And it was kind of in response to so much of what I see online and other conversations of kind of these demands for us to get our kids back into school, which I am all for, and I want that to happen. But I think that sometimes in that trajectory, one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of times those moments of abdication of parenting that happen are highlighted in this pandemic. And some of the things that we're easily able to slide and kind of put on teachers to deal with over the course of the day, we're not able to do in the year 2020. And I think that that's made for really difficult encounters with parenting. But also for me, it's been really uncomfortable to see how much more is being asked of educators that seem outside of what is reasonable. And so when we're looking at solutions, I have hoped that we can talk about ways to make it more equitable for teachers, but also make it more equitable for parents too, and kind of understand and put different values on what expectations are and how we can navigate this moment in history.
Nana, what's your experience?
So I often think that and we've talked about this, that it's easy to pit families against schools, and the families expect everything from the schools, and the schools expect the families to take 50% of the burden. But I think that as a society, the way that we have prioritized education and children in America has created that conflict between families and schools. And I think that really, we need systematic change to be able to counter that. It's what do we want from schools? What is our expectation of schools? Are they our childcare, or are they places where students get an education? Are they a place where our students are supposed to learn coping skills and social emotional skills? Or should they get that from home, kind of entwined with their home's cultural and religious values? What do we really want from our schools? And I think we need to ask ourselves that. And then we need to, have a bigger conversation about the systematic change that needs to happen so that we prioritize children and schools.
I'm super curious from both of you guys, actually, like how, just as a parent, I don't know what's happening. Like, I don't get what the pressure is, because just on the outside, I'm like, oh, you just have to get up, make a lesson plan and teach, so beyond that, the complexities of what pressure would the district be putting on the principals right now that subsequently trickles down to the teachers? Can you educate me on this? Because I don't know, how that.
I can speak in the preschool space. We are accountable to community care licensing, which means that if a parent files a complaint, then we basically have to drop everything and talk to licensing to deal with the complaint. They also can make unannounced visits, and they basically come through the center and
that complaint could be like, I'm sorry to interrupt you, it could be like someone had lice and gave it to my kid and I'm upset, or is it can be whatever.
It's a full investigation, and they have to your records and interview kids, and like it's a whole process. Or if they just pop in and they it's not like, you get the benefit. Well, I shouldn't say that. For many people, you don't necessarily get the benefit of the doubt. They just say, well, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And you can be cited, which then can snowball into a whole bunch of other things.
Wow.
So, in addition to trying to keep kids in and all that stuff, you have licensing. But then now with coronavirus, on top of that, there's the county health department saying that there's you can't have more than this many kids, and you have to do these things, and this is what your procedure has to be, without really a full awareness of the burden financially, mentally, and logistically asking to do all these things, then puts on preschools in particular. And I'm just talking about preschools. I'll let Nana talk about once you leave the preschool space. But there's no extra support. It's not like we're going to come in and evaluate you, but we're sending 2 people on that day so that you aren't short-staffed. It's like we're going to come in and evaluate you and do whatever it is we're going to do, and you still have to run like I'm not here. So it's quite unreasonable, to be frank. I have been very lucky in that I don't have any horror stories with my licensing people. But like I said, I'm part of Californians for Quality Early Learning, and we have members all across the state. And when I tell you, sometimes they run into some people who are terrible, especially during this. I'm like, is how can you possibly be so hard on someone who's busting their behind just so that their parents can go to work and not lose their house, So those are some of the pressures that we're dealing with. And Nana, you can tell her about some of the other things.
I mean, I think in public school, and Mahdis, I don't know how it is at the private school level, but there are, you are given a chunk of taxpayer money, and you need to meet levels of academic achievement, and you need to prove that you are doing that. And like Jennifer had said, okay, maybe you give schools different ways to show that they're meeting those standards, but that's very expensive. And so you have just certain assessments and certain ways that you can show the data that you're meeting all those needs, the needs of all kinds of students, whether it's their academic ability, their socioeconomic status at home. And so there's a lot of just paperwork and constant assessment. And that actually comes down to the teachers too, because it's the teachers who are doing this assessment. And I think some teachers would even argue that they assess more than they get to instruct, especially in a time like this.
Just for the school, right? It's not, and as a parent, I don't get those assessments, right? Very rarely.
At both schools that I work at, we share the assessment results with our families, and the teachers that I see are really good also at explaining them in a way that it makes sense to the parents, and showing them the data for their individual child. But it's constant uploading data, uploading signatures, showing receipts, and metaphorical receipts as well. It's a lot of that. That is.
But it also goes into the school report cards as well,
So these are separate. The report cards and the assessments are different things.
No, there's a report card for each school. So all this data is aggregated, and schools get rated on. I can't remember, is it non-satisfactory, or I can't remember what the rating scale is, but then schools get an assessment as well.
And then you're up against all of that, like public, private, charter. Parents don't know where to send their kid. You have to make your school look good. You have to market your public school, and none of us are marketing people. We came into education not to do that kind of thing. But they have all of that as a burden on them to have to show that they are meeting standards, which there's something to be said for accountability, right? We need some of that. But how do you measure achievement, especially in urban areas with so many different types of students and so many different types of families? How do you measure achievement, but how do you also show the data? Where do you get your assessments? All of that. It's, there are much bigger things that we need to consider.
And there's no kind of alleviated standards because of COVID. Like teachers now are learning how to teach online while doing the assessments, while trying to mitigate.
There are actually more.
Oh.
And here's the interesting thing, right? So if the three of us went out and we tried to run a mile, I would have a time, you would have a time, she would have a time. But
let's not kid ourselves.
we would all have a time, right?
I'll indulge you.
But when schools get assessed, it's not like, okay, your school has this, your school has that. Let's do some kind of mitigating algorithm because you have a percentage of language learners or because you have limited resources. You all need to run that mile the same time, that in the same time, which, as we know, which you just said, is impossible, And so the standards for how you even do those assessments or the aspirations for those assessments, that's a whole nother conversation in and of itself. I mean, it seems like you guys, both of your perspectives are like complements of each other, where on the one hand, which is really interesting, is our expectations of what schools are and what they should be are really not clear right now. And so you have this, well, why don't we have teachers do it, which puts teachers in this position where if an administrator asks you to do a laundry list of things, you because you love children and you want to make sure that you're doing the best for them, you find yourself doing these things that are just not going to be able to be sustained for a long time. So maybe that's the starting point. What do you guys think we should expect from schools? What are schools there for? What's the point of school?
Well, let me just say this, that if all of those things that we're asking schools to do right now are really what we want from schools, and that's okay. We want childcare, we want social emotional support, we want education, all of that. Then what we need to do is treat schools as centers for those things. We need to fund schools in a way that supports all that. So if we are saying as a society, and it's become harder to ignore now with the pandemic, before it was just kind of an underlying tension. But now then if we want that stuff, then really what we need to do is find ways to support it and make that happen like they have in other countries.
I think that's one thing that's really struck me has been my beacon, I think, is looking at other countries and looking how European countries or others, or this, Nana, because we talk about it, but I'm always comparing as like, what are schools in Germany doing for their students? What are schools in Finland doing? Or what are schools in whatever country X doing? And you find that consistently the services, however meager they might be by that country's standards, are more than what you get in the United States, and I come from a place of privilege in that my son goes to a private school, a very good private school in the LA area. And we have incredible teachers and incredible resources. And then yet, even then you find that what we are asking our teachers to do are above and beyond. And I find myself being really uncomfortable at times in terms of where I feel like I should ask the teacher for help and where I need to really assess what I want. And then the other side of that, what's been interesting in this process, Nana, is that for me anyways, has been like, wow, I really have an opportunity to ensure that my child learns what I want them to learn. So my preferred explanation of historical events, my preferred contextualization of international heroes, and things that has been really, and I see the impact of that. And what it's highlighted for me is like how much that kind of a partnership with my son's school or whomever's teaching him outside of me, that I can be in partnership to ensure that that happens. But that can only really happen when there's this dialogue where it's open. And I think that really has, for me, has also shown some possibilities in there. But I'm with you, Nana, that like, if we're going to do this, then we need to have a reckoning in terms of how is that structured? How do we prioritize it as our funding choices in this country? And how do we really put families and our children first? It says a lot about society in terms of where we're placing them now.
And Jennifer, you had said that you came into teaching wanting to educate children,
right?
Not expecting to be a child care provider or all the other things that we're now demanding of teachers. And the other part of that is that teachers are not equipped for that because they haven't been trained for all that. They are trained in pedagogy. And then they come into a school and they see students who were not described in their textbooks, or, kids families that they didn't talk about. And we don't support them in learning how to manage all those demands that we put on them. So that's a problem too, I think.
I mean, because I hear you guys, school is a great hub for all of the things that we're talking about, like it's almost like it would be an ideal place for all kinds of social services, because that's basically what we're talking about is like social services. And I'm not fully sold that school is the best place for that, because I am not fully sold that we're doing a good job with our primary purpose, right? So once we master teaching kids the content, and we can look at our educational system and say, hey, we have, some really strong thinkers, doers, learners, curious people. I don't even think we've gotten to that point yet where we can confidently say that about our schools, and we're layering all these other things on. So
I think part of the problem is that those things are being layered on.
But that's what I'm saying. I'm almost of the mind of, let's pare it back and have, for every school, there should be a hub to give other kind of support. So teachers who are trained in pedagogy can focus on pedagogy. And when it's outside of their skill set, there's a whole building or a whole resource team to support the stuff that we don't know how to do necessarily. I think I have some acuity with some of that stuff just because I've been teaching a long time, and I had really good mentors and I had really good parents, but I'm not the norm. I'm not the typical, my training is not what a lot of teacher training is like right now. And so just because it's in schools right now, I'm not wholly convinced that that's where it needs to stay, because if we're doing a lousy job or a bad job or a mediocre job, and it depends on where your school is, at the primary thing that you're supposed to do, how do we then ask them to do some of these other ancillary things that are really important, but are they really going to be successful at being able to do those also? So that's where I am. That's my question.
I have a question for you, Jennifer, just because your story is fascinating to me for so many reasons, because you've been in education for so long. And then to transition out from like the kind of what many people strive to achieve within education is my understanding, and then decide to focus on early childhood development. To me, kind of just as a parent is to see, okay, well, is the core of our foundational kind of basis is that it should focus on helping young kids form a basis to learn, to be curious. Mm-hmm. And then as they transition into this vast system that really doesn't support them, to be able to navigate it in a way where we restructure around their interests and nurturing that and finding that, and then seeing that as a true partnership. I'm so curious, like what your experience is when you're looking at it, because I agree that inevitably, for so many families, school is the safe place, the feeding place, the care place, whatever it might be. So I don't think that we can look at the United States economy and infrastructure and lie to ourselves that school would be otherwise for so many. But that how then, if that is what's needed, how do we build true foundations so that there is some autonomy, there's some tools, and that there's support outside the structure, maybe within us as a community, like what your experience has been with what you're building at Oak Tree.
Hey there. If you've gotten this far into the episode, chances are that you really like what you're listening. I'm going to ask you to press pause and share this particular episode with 5 people that you think would really enjoy listening to it. I'm also going to ask that you subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and now let's get back to the conversation. Well, I'm old school, right? I come from that old school pedagogy of you assess what you teach. So if you want kids to be really strong social or really strong social skills, emotional skills, and academic skills, the assessment has to line up to that. We don't do that. Everyone knows that the assessment in public school, at least, is a paper and pencil assessment. So if you're, to your question, I think it's effective at Oak Tree because we don't assess with pencil and paper. We assess by having kids use experiences to demonstrate. If I want to see if my kids know how to interact with each other, I'm going to put a puzzle out and see if they can figure out how to take turns and share that one puzzle among 4 kids. I'm not going to take a picture or a piece of paper and say, circle the picture that looks like they're sharing, which is exactly what we do, and unfortunately, there's several things. And I really wish that early childhood educators had some, benefactor with a ton of money. Because what we really need is just what you're saying, is giving kids that proper foundation, using public and private preschools and early childhood education. And I would argue that early childhood education goes all the way through grade 1, so that they can have, rather than paper and pencil assessments, so that they have the resources and the training to do more real life assessment. Because I went to Finland, that's what they do. I've read about Germany, that's what they do. And even when you go somewhere that is really test focused, like Korea, South Korea or Japan, the beginning years don't look like that. And so I feel like my little podcast, I don't have a strong voice, but if I were to say, that's what I would talk about is let's reform those 0 to maybe 7 or 8. And then we can work on figuring out the rest, because if we can get that foundation firmed up a lot better, I think we won't have as many problems with grades 3 and up.
What do you think in terms of like the fact that some of us that are it seems that like in many of the private schools, or at least in LA, that this is kind of like, okay, yes, this is what we should do, and I always feel that I have access to this type of information or science that everyone should have access to. And it's so inequitable on this. And I know, Nana, like you are always dealing with kind of the kids who are the most on the line, now, like, and how, like, I want to know as a parent or as an activist or whichever, like, how do we actually get something moving? Like, how do we, 1, stop hoarding information, and 2, stop hoarding the resource of demand, like not the fact that we're just hoarding the resource, but that when we demand for something for us at our private school, why can't that demand also be linked to LAUSD or Seattle Public Schools or Orlando, whichever, that we say, no, we demand that kids have this as a foundational resource, how do we do that so that that rising tide lifts this boat? Like, I need a path. I think
that we don't a lot of these families who have the need and maybe don't have access to the information, it's not because they don't want it, but speaking from a child of immigrants, I'm an immigrant myself, but my parents never went to parent conferences. My parents never went to school performances or any, there, a lot of schools, especially Title I schools, put on parent education workshops so parents can come in and learn a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents were working their butts off 6 days a week. They didn't have time for this kind of stuff. It's not for lack of
barrier,
right? It for me. Yeah, exactly. And so what do we do to create safety nets for families or some kind of social support for our families so that they can come in and take a morning off from work, not worry about having to lose wages or anything like that, and be able to come in and learn all this, or be able to read an article in the evening and not have to worry about all the other things that are on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think another huge issue is that I always use this metaphor, like if kids are at the core, the first layer around them are their parents, and then the next layer are their teachers, and then principals, and then assistant superintendents, politicians, and so on. And if you think about how far away the people that make policy are from what that core is, that's where the problem is. Right now we're in a situation where everyone wants universal preschool. Sounds fantastic. But the collateral damage would be private centers like mine, because people get aligned, a union or a lobbyist or something that looks out for that interest without looking at the bigger picture. So, for example, something like universal preschool for all 3 and 4-year-olds could devastate my center. And I know that I'm producing high quality, high skilled kids, parents, teachers, and community members, because they're all invited in. And I could very well lose my spot because some politician who from here is way out here has no idea of the impact that we're having in our program. So there's so many things and so many aspects of this that are so jacked up that, it's super difficult to identify one element that would make any kind of, material change or impact anything in a way that's material. One of the things that we could probably all do is lobby, find out who's very active, and especially early childhood education. If you want to know, I'm on a political activist or a policy committee, and I can tell you later, and really bother them.
I think you should tell us now, Jennifer, because people are listening. And I think, truthfully, I think that there is, in this moment that this year has provided us, right? One of the gifts, maybe as much as it's been a burden, has also been the fact that we can do things remotely.
Yeah.
It's possible for all this time where people have said, and I think people in the organizing world are trying to reassess, how do you really galvanize people in the digital space and reach across barriers and things. And I would hate for 2020 to feel like it was like a wasted opportunity. But what I see many, many parents asking, especially in this era of Black Lives Matter and the realization of the true inequity that this country is built on, is how do we give that access? Who do we call? Who do you pressure? And you realize that because people don't engage in the civic way so often in the US, they don't know. So please tell us.
Well, I will definitely put, we have an assemblyman, McCarthy, who is working on a universal preschool bill. And I would love for parents and people who are listening to this to give him a call and say, you have to figure out a way to include private centers. Maybe we should expand instead of saying we're going to focus on 3 and 4s, maybe we should expand it and make sure that it's, like you said, equal access for everybody, so that the resources are spread to public, private, small centers and big centers. Because there's a ton, I'm on Slauson Avenue, there are 9 centers. Literally, I can walk from here to maybe 5 more blocks. There's 9 centers. And all of us have a capacity, I have a capacity of 37 kids. in this neighborhood where there's something along the line of 175 billion kids, So it's not like there's not demand for everybody. There's not like we can't all participate. The only thing is that I see as a barrier is that we want to do the same thing and we cannot. This neighborhood at Angeles Vista and Slauson is not the same as where your school is in Mar Vista. And it's not the same as your school in Venice. Instead of making us all follow the same steps, say, here are the goals, here are the outcomes. If y'all are reaching these, we're good, and giving people more autonomy to really approach it with their populations. Because Nana, your population is vastly different than what I'm experiencing over here, but we don't have any flexibility whatsoever. Everyone wants to come up with a solution. There's not going to be a solution. There's going to be literally millions of solutions because they have to be at the grassroots level.
Well, I think, though, that the problem with, and I think you're right, and I agree with you 100%, but when you have a school system, for instance, like LAUSD, or you have other programs that are so big and cover so many different types of neighborhoods and the demographics are so different everywhere, is then the accountabilities that you want to put in place, because we better keep these whole schools accountable because they're not going to do the right thing unless we make them fill out all these forms to show that they did the right thing for their kids. I think that the only efficient way to do it is to come up with some sort of blanket policy or blanket professional development or whatever, but it doesn't really meet the needs of the demographics and the nuances within each group of students or and really I think we really have to stop talking about students and talk about families, because that, like you were saying, if you think about kids at the core, they're influenced by everyone in their home.
Yeah.
And that definitely trickles into the school. So,
but see, I'm an optimist. I feel like even in this big Leviathan we call LA Unified, if the superintendent said, principals, I trust you. This is the data I want. Here are the ways that I want you. Here are the choices. There's 7 different choices of how you can get me that data. There's 7 different, or however, I'm just saying 7 because that came to mind. There's 7 different, matrices you can use or rubrics. I trust you. Go do it and bring me the data back.
That's a good leader, they say. I think all of the leadership things say that you empower your teams to be able to do what they know best for their team, as long as they meet the deliverables, and it's like you said, and I'm super also curious about how Nana, what you're seeing, with the kids that you're meant to be serving right now, where do you see these major shortcomings?
What's very interesting is I thought, now, in this talk about hybrid learning or staying completely online, my instinct would have been that families who need to go out and work every day and aren't able to, they don't have office jobs where they can work from home or hire a nanny or put their kids in a pod. I thought those families who really needed to be out at work and needed childcare for their kids would want their kids in a hybrid program, and families who had the privilege of being able to keep their kids at home would have chosen online learning. So our school district in LA put out a survey to families, but also to teachers, and asked, what would you prefer when it's time to go back? Do you feel comfortable with hybrid, or would you prefer online? And the surprising thing was that families with means chose hybrid learning and to send their kids back to school more than families who had these needs, but were really terrified of the impacts of this virus and wanted to keep their kids home.
That is interesting.
That makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
Mostly because of what we were saying in the beginning of that, I don't say it in a means of judgment. I truly don't, but it's that desire to abdicate parenting. and we can do that. We have the privilege of doing that, like in the worst of pandemics, you can hire someone to come and do anything for you if you have the means to do it. And I think it comes to the core of why that article was getting at me, is because you see people willingness to pay for someone else to take the risk, or to push someone else to take the risk. And maybe it's my human rights background or whatever, but it just makes me really uncomfortable. It doesn't feel right to me to do that. And so I think the numbers are really interesting, what you're saying, Nana, just because you wouldn't think it would be that way, and it shows like our own biases and things as well.
Do you think that people are looking at it like, I'm going to let someone else take the risk, or are they looking at it, so for me, my parents didn't go to college. My mom grew up in a house where she was adopted into, where they didn't even want kids. My dad grew up extremely, when you hear those stories about like really poor people, that was my dad. It was 2 rooms with 10 people. So he really lived in a really dire situation. Fast forward to me, like you said, I'm an administrator. I've done all these things. I may choose to have someone do this because I have a lot more to lose. My tumble from where I am to, especially as a woman of color, who's come from, from here all the way to where I am, maybe it's that as well. Because you do have so many more women, you do have so many more people of color in the workplace. They may look at it like, I can't risk losing this job or getting to a certain level. I can't risk losing this income, So people are really having to make some really, really, I keep saying messed up. They have to make some messed up choices.
So like I said, I don't have a clear answer, and it's very hard to kind of state your emotion without it coming off as judgment in that way, because I think what is clear is that, especially for women, and probably women of color, because we can make that stretch these days, that this is going to be the most devastating impact in terms of our jobs, in terms of feminism, in terms of so many things, is that we bear the burden of it.
And I want to clarify, I don't think that you sound like I don't hear that as judgment. I hear that as nuance, and how nuanced and how many perspectives. Like for every string you pull out of this thing, there's 7 more that seem to pop up. But what we can do is, in our local schools and our little schools, really encourage and support the leadership in that school to take some bolder steps so that it really addresses what happens in our school, our particular school. And I think that's probably the only way that we're really going to have any change, is by supporting our leaders in schools, putting kids first. My philosophy is kids come first, period. Everybody else comes after kids, but kids come first. And then whether or not teachers can actually do what is needed for kids, that's the next thing. And then all the rest of the priorities have to come after that. If we take care of those 2 things and really, really support principals to have that mindfulness of kids first, what do they need? How can we support them? Perhaps we can, get some traction.
Like in a big old school district like LAUSD, is that kind of culture shift possible? Or
but
how
can we do it at one school? Nana, you're in a school. You tell me, what are you up against?
Well, I will say that as a teacher, you don't get to see a lot of other teachers teaching. And I'm sure, Jennifer, you'll remember that. Now working on the other side, I've been in multiple classrooms, just spent time sitting on Zooms while teachers are teaching, or even just listening to my kids' teachers. And I work at 2 schools that are very different. I work at a Title I school, but then I also work at another West Side school that is not Title I. And we do have, a lot of parents with means. Across the board, I can say that teachers are building communities in these remote classrooms on Zoom. Their children look happy. Kids are actually learning. Teachers are working long hours. And at both schools, I can say that I see that the principals are taking the weight of all the drama of the district and maybe I'm lucky and I work with two fantastic principals, and I know that I do, but they are taking the weight of all of that and letting their teachers do what they need to do and meet the needs of their kids. And it's beautiful. Although I am seeing that the principals are breaking under it's hard. It's a lot.
So what you're saying is that I'm not too far off. If principals can run their schools in a way that let teachers do what they need to do, kids are going to thrive, which is actually encouraging. It was just a crazy harebrained scheme that I had, but to hear that you're seeing that play out. So then now what do principals need? How can we support those principals and principals like that who are creating these phenomenal situations for teachers to create these really great situations for kids?
I think they're up against all of that bureaucracy and accountability and all those ways that we don't trust that our tax dollars are being spent the right way. So we need you to show us in all these different ways how you're doing it right. They need autonomy too, and they need to be trusted too, just like they are trusting their teachers. And I know all administrators are different, but I can say the administrators that I have seen are really doing great things for their teachers, but also trickle down effect for their families and their students, and they're putting them first.
Yeah, like I said, that's really encouraging to hear. And maybe what we can do is start to address this on a district level where we identify parents who are happy with their kids' experience and making sure we highlight those stories. And then highlighting those principals who are facilitating this, because you cannot solve. Like I said, it can't be one solution. It's going to have to be a million different solutions. And it sounds like your two principals are doing their thing in their school.
I don't like this onion. It's too much.
And you could throw money at it and say, well, we'll give you more money because your school has more need, and then you could meet the standards. But you can't throw money at a problem like this that's really, this is not something that money is going to solve. It's something that policy is going to solve, I think.
Yeah. And I think you hit it right on the head. And I think we've been kind of saying that in different ways. But if the policies continue to hold these as the standards and benchmarks, nothing is going to change. I think the only way that you change this is that you support your local school and you give, at your PTA meetings, you all say, we are a school in Venice, and this is what our school is, and this is our population, and we need something different than what you guys are offering.
I think that you brought, Jennifer, especially talking to you, some perspectives to it that I hadn't thought about. And I'm always learning from you, Mahdis, always. So
What else comes to mind? I would love for you to come and join me again, because this has been a really enriching conversation for me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And is there a place, Jennifer, that we can go to hear more about, the resources that you talked about here and kind of the people you said we should call? Where do we go for that?
So what we'll do is, once we're done, we will write some show notes. And usually while I'm talking, I got engaged and I forgot to write stuff down, but I write out a list of show notes, and they're always at the bottom. So when you click on the podcast, there'll be some names of assembly members in the state of California who are super active and who are policy makers. You can also look up SQL. I would love, Nana, if you could give a shout out and send like a LinkedIn profile to your principals so that we can spread some love and tell them we heard that they're doing a fantastic job, because they probably don't get that, and we would love to do it. So, we'll put some show notes in to make sure that we get some resources and that we can spread the love a little bit.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, you guys. So that's our conversation for today. I hope you found some information that was interesting or a perspective that you hadn't thought of. If you like what you heard, or even if you have some feedback, put a comment in our comment section. Be sure to like our page and make sure that you subscribe so that you can hear when the next video comes out. Thanks so much again for joining us.